16 was brutally abducted last month by masked members of the Maduro regime's security forces. She was taken from the home of her grandparents. Where she is now, we do not know. probably in one of the dictatorship's detention centers. She may be with her father, who disappeared without a trace in January. What had they done wrong? Her brother was a soldier, but refused to follow the regime's order to commit brutal acts against the population. For that offense, the entire family must be punished. Juan Requesens is ordered to turn slowly towards the camera. The video showing him standing with a dazed look, as if in a fog, wearing underwear stained with excrement. He had supposedly confessed to planning a coup, but of course, there was no proof. The day before his arrest, Juan had stood before the National Assembly. He gave a speech in which he repeated one key sentence, a promise to his country and to himself: I refuse to give up. Alfredo Diaz, an opposition leader and former mayor, was pulled from a bus last November and thrown into the depths of El Coide, Latin America's largest torture center. One more political prisoner in a long line of others. This week came the news of his death. Another life gone, another victim of the regime. These stories are not unique. This is Venezuela today. It is how the Venezuelan regime treats its own people: a sister, a student, a politician. Anyone who still believes in stating the truth out loud may disappear violently into a system built specifically to eradicate this belief. Samantha, Juan, and Alfredo were not extremists. They were ordinary Venezuelans dreaming of freedom, democracy, and rights. For this, their lives were stolen from them. Under this regime, children are not spared. More than 200 children were arrested after the elections in 2024. The United Nations documented their experience as follows: plastic bags pulled tight over their heads, electric shocks to the genitals, blows to the body so brutal it hurt to breathe, sexualized violence, cells so cold as to cause intense shivering, foul drinking water teeming with insects, screams that no one came to stop. One child lay in the dark, whispering his mother's name over and over, in the hope she would not believe he was dead. A 16-year-old boy eventually came home, so ravaged by electric shocks and beatings that he could not hug his mother without pain shooting through his body. For months, he jumped at every sound and barely slept. At night, he would wake with a jolt, convinced the soldiers were back to resume their attacks. As we sit here in Oslo City Hall, innocent people are locked away in dark cells in Venezuela. They cannot hear the speeches given today, only the screams of prisoners being tortured. This is how authoritarian powers try to crush those who stand up for democracy. The United Nations has declared these acts to be crimes against humanity. This is the regime of Nicolas Maduro. Venezuela has evolved into a brutal authoritarian state facing a deep humanitarian and economic crisis. Meanwhile, a small elite at the top, shielded by political power, weapons, and legal impunity and human trafficking. Daughters simply disappear. Children become objects of trade in the hands of criminals who see human desperation as a business opportunity. A quarter of the population has already fled the country, one of the world's largest refugee crises. Those who remain live under a regime that systematically silences, harasses, and attacks the opposition. Venezuela is not alone in this darkness. The world is on the wrong track. The authoritarians are gaining. We must ask the inconvenient question: why is it so hard for us to preserve democracy, a form of government that was conceived to protect our freedom and our peace? When democracy loses, the result is more conflict, more violence, more war. In 2024, more elections were held than in any previous year, but ever fewer are free and fair. The power of the law is misused, independent media are silent, and critics are imprisoned. More and more countries, including those with long democratic traditions, are drifting towards authoritarianism and militarization. Authoritarian regimes learn from each other. They share technology and propaganda systems. Behind Maduro stands Cuba, Russia, Iran, China, and Hezbollah, providing weapons, surveillance, and economic lifelines. They make the regime more brutal and more robust. And yet, amid this darkness, we find Venezuelans who have refused to give up, those who keep the flame of democracy alive, who never yield despite the enormous personal costs. They remind us continually of what is at stake. Many of them are here with us today. Carlos, the poet; Claudia, the activist; Pedro, the university professor; Ana Luisa, the nurse; Corina, the grandmother; Antonio, the opposition politician; Venezuela's president-elect, Edmundo González Urrutia. The Nobel Peace Prize laureate, María Corina Machado, has done everything in her power to be able to attend the ceremony here today, a journey in a situation of extreme danger. Although she will not be able to reach this ceremony and today's events, we are profoundly happy to confirm that she is safe and that she will be with us here in Oslo. At the heart of the battle for democracy shines the simple truth. Democracy is more than a form of government, as little more than a contest between superpowers, overlooking the bravery of those who seek freedom in their own country. What all these observers have in common is this: the moral betrayal of those who actually live under this brutal regime. If you only support people who share your political views, you have understood neither freedom nor democracy. Yet many critics stop there. They see local democratic forces cooperating by necessity with actors they dislike and use that to justify withholding support. This put ideological conviction ahead of human solidarity. How should we regard those who use all their energy finding fault with the hard choices that brave defenders of democracy have had to make, instead of recognizing their courage and their sacrifice, or asking how we too can help fight dictatorships? It is easy to stand on principle when someone else's freedom is at stake. But no democracy movement operates in ideal circumstances. Activist leaders must confront and resolve dilemmas that we onlookers are free to ignore. People living under dictatorship often have to choose between the difficult and the impossible. Yet many from us, from a safe distance, expect Venezuela's democratic leadership to pursue their aims with a moral purity their opponents never display. This is unrealistic, this is unfair, and it shows ignorance of history. Many who have stood at this podium to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, including Lech Walesa and Nelson Mandela, knew well the dilemmas of dialogue. In authoritarian systems, dialogue can lead to improvement, but it can also be a trap. Dialogue is often used to buy time, create division, and control the agenda. María Corina Machado has participated in dialogue processes for years. She's never rejected the principle of talking to the other side, but she's dismissed empty processes. Peace without justice is not peace. Dialogue without truth is not reconciliation. Venezuela's future can take many forms, but the present is one thing only. It is horrific. That is why the democratic opposition in Venezuela must have our support, not our indifference or worse, condemnation. Every day, its leaders must choose a path that is in fact open to them, not the path of wishful thinking. Support for democratic development is support for peace. But since the announcement of this year's Nobel Peace Prize, the question has been posed: does democracy really lead to peace? The research findings are crystal clear, and the answer is yes. Not because democracy is perfect, but because the mechanisms of democracy make war less likely. Democracies are equipped with safety valves, free media, power-sharing structures, independent courts, civil society organizations, and elections that make it possible to change leadership without violence. In this political environment, differing options are not a threat to be put down, but an advantage. In a democracy, a leader who ignores facts can be replaced in the next election. In an authoritarian regime, the leader stays in power and replaces all who tell uncomfortable truths. Loyalty takes the place of reality, and dangerous decisions are taken in the dark. War is always costly, but in authoritarian regimes, it is not the leaders who pay the highest price. This is why democracy almost never go to war with each other, as authoritarian states are more prone to do. Nicolas Maduro's rule in Venezuela shows why. Conflicts are resolved with brute force, not negotiation. The result is a society where millions are forced into silence, with consequences that do not stop at the border. Instability, violence, and systematic destruction of the country's institutions have affected the entire region, and a neighboring country has been threatened with military invasion. Venezuela demonstrates with painful clarity that authoritarian rule both destroys a society from within and spreads instability abroad. Democracy is obviously no guarantee of peace, but it is the most effective system we have to prevent violence and conflict. This line of reasoning often prompts a well-known counter-argument, that democracy itself causes unrest and conflict, that demanding freedom is dangerous. This is an old claim. Authoritarian leaders have used it for generations to defend their positions of power. Today, they supercharge the argument with disinformation and propaganda, two of their essential weapons. Ladies and gentlemen, as citizens of a democracy, we have a duty to be critical of information sources. Alarm bells should ring when the views we express are identical to those disseminated by one of the world's most manipulative disinformation systems. For in that case, we are not just spreading information, we are spreading the strategic propaganda of a dictator. What are we all to think when we read that it is the Venezuelan opposition that is threatening the country with war, that the democratic movement desire an invasion, when the narrative is turned upside down and when the victims are branded as aggressors? This is a version of reality that the Maduro regime tells the world, that it is the guarantor of peace. But peace based on fear, silence, and torture is no peace. It is submission depicted as stability. No, the source of the violence is not the democracy activists. It is those at the top who refuse to cede power. It was not Nelson Mandela who made South Africa violent, but the apartheid regime's crackdown on demands for equality. Opposition groups did not start the imprisonments in Belarus, the executions in Iran, or the persecution in Venezuela. The violence comes from authoritarian regimes as they lash out against popular calls for change. Peace and democracy cannot be separated without draining both of meaning. Lasting peace depends on the rule of law, political participation, and respect for human dignity. Before we can discuss political disagreements, we must establish some form of democracy. Without it, there is no meaningful distinction between right and left, no way to legitimately disagree, no genuine politics. Democracy is not an expendable luxury. It is not an ornament to be put on a shelf. Democracy is hard work. It is action and negotiation. It is a living obligation. The instruments of democracy are the instruments of peace. We gather here today, therefore, to defend something far more important than either side of a political or ideological divide. We have the very foundation on which lasting peace rests. When people refuse to surrender democracy, they refuse to surrender peace. One who understands this is María Corina Machado. As a founder of Sumate, an organization devoted to building democracy, Ms. Machado stepped forward to advocate free and fair elections more than 2 decades ago.